This is ContactTalkRadio.com, consciousness in action, and you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sheri Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on September 15th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. Before I get into the meat of today, I will give you my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can visit Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. From there, of course, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show and or either live or archived, and or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And while you're there, you'll now see above the most recently posted show a banner, a downloadable freebie, which is labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy. And that's friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Steven Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun signs, actually needs to be happy. So I've said this before, but I'll repeat myself. It's based on an interview I did with Steve a couple of years ago about depression in the chart, and he's given me permission to distribute this more widely as a means of promoting how valid astrology is in our lives. And if you download this, you will be signed up for my astrological newsletter, but of course you can unsubscribe anytime. So listen to the podcast, karmicevolution.com, Astrologically Speaking, and be sure to grab your How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy downloadable freebie when you're there. And, enjoy some astrological words of wisdom from one of the greats. Okay, so separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page at Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. And I've also been posting now on Instagram, so feel free to follow me there as well. You can find me under Karmic Evolution. Now, finally, I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners only for $99. So if you're interested in astrology and you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart or your natal horoscope, this is a reading essentially of the snapshot of the exact position of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth. And this can reveal a great deal about you. So when you use a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading as a tool for soul growth, it can be tremendously helpful to you if you want to gain greater consciousness about what is your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, if you desire to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back in any area of your life that's affecting you now, relationships, career, finances, health, whatever. A natal chart reading can help lead you to greater understanding about how to heal old karmic wounds and to help you co-create your own future happiness and success through astrological insight. So it's easy, again, when you take advantage of my 1 hour, $99 discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners only at almost half the regular price. Conscious awareness has never been either so easy or so affordable. You can find easy access to this to this offer at my website on karmicevolution.com/karmic99. So check it out. Okay, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use now. And let's take a look back before we move forward, okay? As you know, or those who listen regularly to this podcast know, that's something that I like to do. No event is segregated from events that came before. You know, one thing leads to another. So it often proves good for us to look back, because then we can see these astrological energies and how they've manifested both in the community, in the collective, and in our personal lives from a continuous point of view. And once, I've said this before and I've been saying it a lot lately, once an aspect happens, like a lunation or an eclipse or whatever, or even the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction or the Saturn square to Uranus or whatever else is going on, Pluto's going into, Aquarius next year, that these things trigger happenings, and they don't just disappear or dissipate overnight. So some of what I want to look at today, which I mentioned in my, announcements for this podcast today, is Queen Elizabeth and, of course, her death. But first, let me just say that, as we know, the September 10th Pisces full moon, which was, less than a week ago, last Saturday, it arrived early in the morning, in Pacific and Eastern time, asked the Virgo sun to release its attachment to perfection and instead to go with the universal flow. This is akin to what I said last week, which is let go and let God, right? Because earthy Virgo represents health and service, particularly as it pertains to our daily routines, we're cautioned now during this waning portion of the monthly lunar cycle to continue to relinquish our concentration on serving others only at the cost of our own physical, mental, emotional, and or spiritual health now. Now that the moon was approaching full in Pisces, in the Pisces to Virgo polarity, right? Pisces moon, Virgo sun, which was due to occur only about 1.5 days later, which is when, on September 8th, the Queen of England shed her mortal coil. And that would seem to be, in retrospect, no great surprise. So, in fact, just after I finished releasing my podcast a week ago on September 8th, word hit the airwaves that the 96-year-old Queen Elizabeth, the longest reigning British monarch, had left her body and crossed over. Now, Queen Elizabeth, born April 21st, 1926, at 2:40 a.m. in London, England, ascended to the throne at the age of 25 at her father King Charles II's death on February 6th of 1954, and she remained queen until September 8th, 2022, at her death at the age of 96, or nearly 70 and a half years. So, as befits royalty, when we look at her chart, we see that she was a third house Taurus sun, which perhaps indicated that her sun came into prominence when she was young, because the third house is ruled by Mercury's Gemini, and Gemini rules young people. And she had a 7th house Leo moon. And Leo is, aside from being the sign of royalty, Leo is loyal. It's fixed, right? It's fixed fire. And she was married to Prince Philip. Their marriage occurred on July 9th of 1947 from the age of 21 until his death on April 9th of 2021, just before her 95th birthday. In addition, she was a Capricorn rising and clearly born with and perceived as having, the ascendant is how other people see us, right? It's our physical appearance and how people perceive us to be, whether that's how we are underneath or not. But she was perceived as having a sense of responsibility, as well as a sense of loyalty and regality, as mentioned, 7th house Leo moon, and a love of nature, the 3rd house Taurus sun. And, since they've been talking and writing so much about her now, many of us know about her dogs and her corgis, and she had 30 of them during her lifetime, and she loved her daily walks with her dogs. And that might have been also a potential manifestation of her Mercury Virgo ruled 6th house. That's the natural house, right? Which I'll get into in a minute. That, that house represents our daily routine. And often people with signatures in that house, and she did have her North Node there, find comfort or take solace in their pets. She had obviously many racehorses, and particularly, I think, equine therapy is reflected in the Virgo archetype in the 6th house. And she had all of the dogs, and I don't know if she had other pets, but I mean, that wouldn't surprise me, right? So we can surmise, based on the fact that we have her whole life to look back on now, that although she was a 3rd house sun, which makes her Geminian, that she wasn't actually unnecessarily chatty, right? And that might well stem from her Cap rising's more naturally reservist nature. And ditto for her 7th house Leo moon, which normally we might think would be, a person who was a little bit more of an attention grabber. But in her case, it allowed her to perform her duties with the serious solemnity of a Cap rising, but also with the warmth of a Taurus sun. Now, they've been making a lot also on the news about her sense of humor. And it's funny because I can tell you that, my mother was a Capricorn sun. I believe in the 6th house, which has a Virgo overtone, and a Taurus moon. She was a Cancer rising, but what I've noticed about people with that mixture of Capricorn and Taurus is that, Taurus likes to have fun. Taurus is warm, and relationship oriented and physical. And Cap, of course, is serious and a little bit more restrictive, but that the sense of humor is wry and dry. And it's really kind of amusing when I think about it, because my mother would come up with these things. She wasn't particularly, my father was the funny one. He had everybody laughing, he would tell jokes and stuff. And my mother would appreciate them. But when she said something funny, it was never really for effect. It was more for she would just say something dry and wry. And when it would hit you a minute later. And it wasn't like something that made you guffaw. It was something where you went, oh my God, that is hysterical. Did you just say that? That's hysterical. So I find that the Cap and the Taurus combination, and sometimes just Cap in general, based on other signs, maybe a Sag, signature or something, that they're just not jocular, they're not they just don't get up and start performing, even in this case, like I said, with the Leo moon, because they're more reserved, but yet when they say something, and it's rare, I'm talking maybe 2 or 3 times a year, you just go, oh my God, that is just so unbelievably hysterically funny. I can't believe you said that. And they always know what they're saying. It's not like it slips out or anything. It's just very funny. Anyway, the stability of Queen Elizabeth's Cap rising says a lot, because, history shows that she mostly rose to the occasion to do the responsible thing, regardless of what that was. And she proved this as early as the age of 14, when on October 30th, 1940, during the German blitzkrieg of World War II, when so many British and European and other children were being sent from their homes to escape death at the hands of Nazi bombing, and in the case of Jewish children, potential capture and death by starvation or torture or the gas chamber, Elizabeth gave an empathic speech directed at those children, during which she said, and forgive me if you've already seen this on the news, but I saw it, I think, on Facebook. I don't know if I saw it on the news, but this is a direct quote of her short presentation that day. And bear in mind, again, she was only 14. I'm almost going on 14 and a half. So she said, thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel very much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all. Now, bear in mind, I don't know if she wrote this or someone wrote this for her. It's very formal, right? But in 1940, people spoke more formally anyway. So it's hard to tell, but it still is representative to what I think might have come naturally to her with a Capricorn rising. And she continued, to you, living in new surroundings, we send a message of true sympathy. And at the same time, we would like to thank the kind people who have welcomed you into their homes in the country. All of us children who are still at home think continually of our friends and relations who have gone overseas, who have traveled thousands of miles to find a wartime home and a kindly welcome in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the United States of America. My sister and I feel we know quite a lot about these countries. Our father and mother have so often talked to us of their visits to different parts of the world, so it's not difficult for us to picture the sort of life you are all leading and to think of all the new sights you must be seeing and the adventures you must be having. But I am sure that you, too, are often thinking of the old country. I know you won't forget us. It is just because we are not forgetting you that I want, on behalf of all the children at home, to send you our love and best wishes, to you and to your kind hosts as well. Before I finish, I can truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen, and we are trying, too, to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war. We know every one of us that in the end, all will be well. For God will care for us and give us victory and peace. And when peace comes, remember it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. Now, the Queen's longevity, the fact that she ruled for a little over 70 years before she died, has made a lot of people, both in England and throughout the world, know her as the only monarch in England. And, some people alive today will have heard this when they were young like her as well. Perhaps younger than 14, and people still in their late 80s or early 90s or whatever, and the stories that those people have told their children and they've told their children. So clearly her answer to the call of duty was a resounding yes. There was one notable exception, however, which was many years later when the Queen showed little to no public emotion concerning the death of Princess Diana. Now, she did eventually, but only after much coaxing from other royals and her advisors. Now, in addition, the fixity of Taurus, which is also a sign of financial resources, and the loyalty of Leo, the sign, of course, as I said, of royalty, combined with an appearance of that Cap rising stalwart responsibility, and the fact that, which I'll mention later, she had a South Node in Capricorn on her ascendant within a degree, that come what may, she really seemed to be the embodiment of what's commonly known, or what used to commonly be known as the British stiff upper lip, which one would keep in times of crisis. So a traditionalist who managed to walk the fine line between so many monarchical traditions while also navigating more modern times, Queen Elizabeth held the throne for longer than many people today have been alive. And according to the British publication The Guardian, And here I quote, "Coming to the throne at the age of 25, she successfully steered the monarchy through decades of turbulent change, with her personal popularity providing ballast during the institution's more difficult times. And as Queen of the UK and 14 other realms, and head of the 54-nation Commonwealth, Elizabeth II was easily the world's most recognizable head of state during an extraordinarily long reign." And I'd mention here, too, that in the way that I look at a chart and do an elemental and modal mix, which I base on Richard Idemann's psychological astrological teachings about how to identify Jungian defined dominant and inferior functions, dominant meaning conscious, and inferior meaning lying below the realm or level of consciousness, ergo unconscious, that she comes out fixed water. So her dominant functional energy was Scorpio. Now, we know, just in general, right, Scorpio's about power, and it's also about wealth. It's joint resources, and it's hidden resources, because it has to do with what's underneath. Metaphorically, that's what's hidden in our unconscious, which can be our shadow side, which when we bring it into the light, we can become, extremely knowledgeable and conscious about our lives and the world around us. But also that, the what was I going to say? There's a lot of riches, right, underneath, and joint resources, which in this case, of course, she shared with the state, or they were inherited or whatever. Pluto rules the 8th house of inheritance in the natural chart. And Scorpio is also about trust, which means that it has a connotation as well about loyalty. So between her Leo moon and her dominant function in Scorpio, and the fact that her 9th and 10th houses in her chart are ruled by Pluto Scorpio, we have a very loyal person here. Again, combined with the Capricorn energy, there's, loyalty to tradition. And yet she ruled over a time of great change. So the Pluto-ruled Scorpio archetype also possesses, though, inherent regenerative traits. So, deemed to be primarily of robust health during most of her life, the Queen was actively fulfilling her duties up until at least 2 days before her passing, when she met with the brand new British Prime Minister, Liz Truss. And, she maintained her control over the monarchy long past the time when she might have stepped down to make way for her son Charles to ascend and rule. And another comparison, forgive me, to my mother, but Queen Elizabeth was born in April of 26. My mother was born in January of 27. So they're fairly close in age. And my mom passed in the summer of 2015 at 88 and a half. And one of the things I noticed, because I sat with her for the last 2 days when she was mostly not conscious, and we knew it was the end, I could tell it was very difficult for her to give up the body. I kept saying to her, not kept saying, but I said to her, it's okay to let go. And when I said that, I didn't actually say it repetitively. I said it once. And she had her eyes closed and was seemingly unconscious, and her eyes flew open, and she had this look of panic. And I thought, oh my God, she does not want to leave her physical body. So I kind of laid off that, and did it more in my mind, where I sent just love and messages and about who was waiting for her on the other side, because I had already pretty much intuited, who was there and who she wanted to see and who wanted to see her. So I feel like the Queen had some similar energies, which is one of the reasons she lived even longer than my mom, more fixed energy than my mom. But it's just an interesting side. So her energy is mostly fixed, which we might attribute again to both her physical longevity, along with a scorpionic ability to regenerate back to good health when ill. And as far as I know, she never really had any serious illnesses throughout her life. and her fixed angles, which are Leo rising, Aquarius, Uranus is Aquarius on the descendant, Pluto, Scorpio on the midheaven, and Venus is Taurus on the IC. So they concur with that. In astrology, I don't really think this is true, especially since the rise in divorce over the last 30 years. But they used to say if you had fixed angles, you would never get divorced. You would be married for life, assuming you marry, of course. But anyway, in her case, it's no wonder she wasn't going anywhere all that time, those 96 years, with all that fixity. However, she had what's known as a singleton planet in the Earth element, which was her Taurus sun. In other words, her Taurus sun was her only planet in an Earth sign. And when you use Richard Idemann's methodology, which I've already done a webinar on, if anyone's interested, send me an email at Sheri@karmicevolution.com, because it's a specific kind of formula to do this. But without those born without any Earth or only one planet in Earth, what I was starting to say when I interrupted myself is it doesn't count the angles, and it doesn't count the house cusps, and it doesn't count asteroids. It's just the 9 planets, and that's it. And the ruler of the ascendant is counted twice, and the luminaries are counted twice. So there's actually a formulaic structure to doing this. Okay, I digress. But those born, according to Richard Idemann's methodology, without any Earth or with only one planet in Earth, which is called a singleton, tend to unconsciously lack a sense of substantiality in this world. And that leads them to need, or as he puts it, to hunger for material things. Again, this is an unconscious energy that tends to rise into consciousness through our dream world, and particularly during times of crisis. One of the dreams that someone who lacks Earth might have is that, and most often when they're young, or when the Earth element is rising into consciousness. Again, that's often either when we're young or during a time of crisis. We may feel like we're being chased by monsters or boulders rolling down a hill. And, as you're running away, just as the boulder or the monster is about to tap you on the shoulder or accost you or whatever, grab you from behind, you wake up. Right? So, it's an energy that Queen Elizabeth, believe it or not, actually shares with Donald Trump, who's got no planetary bodies in an Earth sign. And again, the Idemann methodology doesn't include the asteroids, the angles, or the house cusps. So, pictures of both Trump's, Trump Tower, his apartment or penthouse or whatever in New York City, and his Mar-a-Lago home, as well as the Queen's luxurious, even if they're old because they're castles, environment and homes, and their glorious adornments, all the chandeliers and the windows and the stained glass and, all that kind of stuff certainly fit the bill. So what it means is that they're looking on an unconscious level for a reason to exist. And in doing so, they find themselves over-manifesting. Now, in Trump's case, along with his expansive, exaggerative Sagittarius moon, a lack of Earth can lead also to weight gain, as if we unconsciously feel the need to show the world we are a solid entity. But it definitely comes in the sense of accruing a lot of physical, material possessions. And there's no doubt whether, no matter how you want to look at either of these two people, that this is what they were able to accomplish. Now, to go back to Queen Elizabeth's moon, I'd posit as well that her 7th house Leo moon, because the 7th house is known in psychological astrology as the house of projection, attracted to her more colorful personalities. I already said she had the sense of humor, right? But it was dry and muted and quiet, but more colorful personalities like, her husband, Prince Philip, who was a military man, which kind of eliminated or perhaps just concealed her unconscious desire to be more on center stage or colorfully entertaining herself. So in other words, she projected that out to her partners, and those who she drew to her exhibited the more performance-oriented behavior. But we can also see with that Capricorn seriousness that she possessed, that she did her duty and got on the radio or, on TV or went, traveling or whatever to address different groups and different people as a sign of loyalty and responsibility to her country. So that's about duty again. Now, Jupiter's rulership of her 11th house of groups and associations, including those of a political nature, such as legislatures, indicated her busy travel schedule over the years. And according to the British publication The Guardian, and here I quote, she was the most widely traveled of any world head of state. She visited every Commonwealth country bar Cameroon, which joined in 1995, and Rwanda in 2009. She visited Canada more than 20 times, Australia 16, New Zealand 10, and Jamaica 6. As Queen of the United Kingdom and 14 other realms and head of the 54-nation Commonwealth, Elizabeth II was easily the world's most recognizable head of state during an extraordinarily long reign. So, I had a brief conversation with my son recently, who's only 27. Well, not only, he's a man, and is studying law right now, but who also studied economics as his undergrad degree. And what I learned from him when he was in college was that a lot of the economics had to do with colonialism. And those of you who are perhaps younger listening to this, who are interested in astrology or astrologers yourselves, know that the younger generation of astrologers also brought this into the realm of astrology, colonization by the world's great powers, and that obviously includes the British monarchy, the French, the Spanish, and, America, although we don't call ourselves an empire or anything like that. However, the influence and the use of another country's peoples and resources to produce things for another country has gotten a lot of attention over the last couple of years. And a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about the Queen. And why I alluded to my son is we had a very, very short conversation where I said, I'm guessing that you probably don't feel too empathetic or sympathetic about her death. Number one, she wasn't young, and young people are like, well, hey, she's 96, like when grandma died, it wasn't like we expected she was going to live forever, right? So they have that kind of point of view, but also that, we went right to the colonization and all the damage that was done to places like India and Pakistan and, so many of the other nations, some of which are named here, and how many of them also in the news at the news or following the news of her death have talked about breaking from England. And I've seen even things like there are people in Canada are like, are there different places in Canada? And I have no answer to that question because I'm no historian, on Canada for sure. I'm no historian in general, but that this is sparking a conversation, as I said. And, part of what's been in the news lately is talk of the fact that this is the end of an era. And so because this era of Queen Elizabeth's reign lasted so long, she had her whatever jubilee, whatever they call it, I don't even know, the 70th, right, last year. So it's kind of like, it's remarkable or to be remarked upon that she is now gone. And it's hard to look at it other than as the end of an era. So what I'm going to look at in a few minutes is the end of, how else eras are ending now. But I wanted to read this too in relationship to talking about her traveling to so many different countries. And this is from, it's from a few years ago, but when I looked it up on the internet, it came up from the Irish Central publication. And it says, quote, Queen Elizabeth was also the first British monarch to visit Ireland in 100 years, when she was widely applauded for her gestures of reconciliation while on her 4-day trip to Ireland begun May 17, 2011, at the invitation of then Irish President Mary McAleese. The trip was then returned to the UK by President Michael Higgins in 2014, marking yet another milestone for the improved relationship between our two countries. The very last British monarch to set foot in Ireland was Queen Elizabeth's grandfather, King George V, who toured the country in 1911, when the whole island was still a part of the United Kingdom. In the following 100 years, the 1916 Easter Rising, the Irish War of Independence, the Irish Civil War, the First World War, and the Second World War had all dramatically changed not just Ireland and England themselves, but the relationship between the two countries, all in the space of 2 generations of the British monarchy. And it goes on, while there were those who protested against the visit of a British queen to Ireland, and again, right, some of what my son was talking about, colonialism and taking advantage and all that, of the economic resources, and then of course, between Britain and Ireland is a huge that was a religious problem. The Irish, have allegiance to the Pope, and the church in England, of course, broke with the Pope in the 1500s under Henry VIII's, Henry Tudor's reign. So that's a long-standing thing, because the Protestant church, right, the Anglican church took over in England. Anyway, it says, while there were those who protested against the visit of a British queen to Ireland, her 4 days in the country were heralded as an all-around success, as everyone from Dublin to Cork welcomed her, and the importance of the trip in presenting the success of Irish peace cannot be forgotten. Not only did Queen Elizabeth use a few words in Irish in her main speech, but she also laid a wreath in honor of those who had died for the cause of Irish freedom in Dublin's Garden of Remembrance, essentially a mark of tribute to people who may have fought against her own country's soldiers. Before we look at, this is very much, I think, again, just part and parcel of her energy, and how she did bring people together out of her sense of responsibility, out of her sense of, Taurian warmth, as they would say. I mean, Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Her moon in Leo is in Libra's natural 7th house. So there's also that connotation, right? It's like, let's all just get along. Let's all just, hug each other. I mean, we're all just human beings, right? I mean, I have to eat, you have to eat. I have to sleep, you have to sleep. We all want to succeed here. So I think that, part of why I'm reading all this stuff to everyone today is just to give a glimpse into this particular person and how she navigated her energies in this lifetime with such a huge mantle of responsibility thrust onto her shoulders at such a young age. And for those of us who are feminists, even though she kept strictly to tradition, for the most part, she did exhibit a lot of flexibility. Just today or yesterday on the news, I don't remember which part of the funeral procession this was, but leading up to her funeral next Monday on the 19th, we had, there was some kind of march, and the new King Charles III was in uniform, but also was his sister, Princess Anne, and she was the first female to be able to march in that parade that was always an all-male thing. So again, and I think that that was mentioned after all of these preparations for her mourning, right, up to her funeral, were all made with the Queen and all approved by her. So I'm not really sure if that included Queen Anne's participation in uniform, in pants, whatever, full regalia dress, as an equal with all the other men. But it is interesting to contemplate. Okay, so before we look at the Queen's transits and progressions on the day of her death, I'd first like to point out that rampant in the media is the phrase, the end of an era. Now, I mentioned that already, but again, the queen was in power or on the throne for 70 years. And there's just a huge symbolism in that phrase. I'm mindful, too, of several other things that I'm probably not going to go into in as much detail as I had originally thought I might for this podcast, but I will get to them probably next week. There was an article recently in the New York Times, excuse me, about European economics and how the tide is turning away from the era of austerity. And this is also proven true already in the United States, probably when Biden first came into power, or even before Biden, when even Trump, will give credit where credit is due, gave money to everybody in the country, right? Because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the disruption it was causing in our lives due to not loss of, but, inability to work in a workplace, to gather in groups, supply chain problems, etc. So that, whereas the era that began with Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s was about austerity, fiscal responsibility, fiscal austerity. There was an economic theory called starve the beast, which is to deregulate the national government's regulations so that businesses could flourish more freely, to do away with taxation, which we all saw in, I forget if it was 2018 or 19 in the United States, but that Europe under Margaret Thatcher, while President Ronald Reagan was in power here, they were in lockstep, right? And that this era is ending because people are beginning to understand that government is good for more than just being railed against as a bureaucracy, as slow, as inefficient, and as its regulations as unnecessary, right? Or the belief that its regulations are unnecessary, free market and all that, that now we're starting to see the oil tanker turn slowly. So that's just something that occurred to me. I also just saw on the news before recording this that Roger Federer, the tennis player, I don't follow tennis very closely, so that he just announced his retirement. So for those who are sports fans, particularly tennis fans, that's the end of an era, right? So I just look at these little things. There are more, and we'll talk about it more in following weeks. But all of this talk about the end of an era leads me to share with you some of the predictions that were made about 30 years ago by renowned traditional astrologer Bernadette Brady in her 1992 book, Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and Lark. Now, half of her book is devoted to tracing the history of the Saros series cycles of eclipses. And it turns out that many monarchs and other famous people are born under eclipses. Now, Donald Trump, again, is one of them because his sun conjoins his north node and his moon his south node. Today, however, this podcast is not about him, contrary to what you might believe. And the Queen, however, was not born under an eclipse, but her son Charles, who's now ascended to the throne at her death, and her grandson William, now the Prince of Wales, are. So I wanted to read from Bernadette Brady's book, Predictive Astrology, just a little bit to give you a little bit of a clue about why this phrase is so in the collective about the end of an era. And she writes, born on an eclipse. In 1982, the world was a Twitter with the birth, that's interesting because that was before Twitter, right? With the birth of a future king of England. The first child of Prince Charles had been born. The date was June 21st, 1982. He was born at 9:03 p.m. in London, for those who are interested. And astrologers knitted their brows because also on that day a solar eclipse occurred. Prince William, the heir to the British throne, was born with the sun in his natal chart conjunct a solar eclipse. Being born on a solar eclipse is not unusual since these eclipses happen at least twice a year, but having a future king with such a natal event brought eclipses to greater astrological attention. If you were born on a solar or lunar eclipse, your life is going to encapsulate that particular Saros series which produced the eclipse at your birth. Thus, you are deeply connected to that Saros series, and you will act as a vehicle for the series' expression. Prince William was born into Saros Series 2 Old North. We know that, given his social position, he's not fated to have an ordinary life, and that events in his life are now and ever will be intimately bound to the history of Britain. If there is a drama in his life, particularly in adulthood, then there's a good chance that there will be some drama in the monarchy. Saros Series 2 Old North is finishing. It's in its last stages, and just a few more tiny partial eclipses around the South Pole are yet to occur. Now, a large part of this section of Brady's book talks about what is the Saros cycle series and all that. So you can definitely get this book on Amazon or elsewhere if you're interested in really learning more. However, she says that this particular series started its life in AD 792 and will end in July 2036 when the prince is 54 years old. The series is one of separation or ending of unions. The issues of separation and parting must be reckoned with for those born with the Saros series prominent. In fact, lives touched by this series often symbolize schism, rift, or disunion. Life's challenges will highlight the ability to act quickly, allowing old structures to crumble while learning how to create new forms from the collapse of the old ones. Thus, for Prince William, a future King of England, to be part of this series is to presuppose that he may well be the last British monarch in the current style. There could be a sudden collapse of the monarch's role in the community while William is king. He would then find himself faced with the choice of either adapting very quickly or being swept away with the old structure. This presages the end of an era. The years around 2036 are the most likely for these events to manifest. To add extra weight to this theory, this series started in AD 792 at about the beginnings of the tradition of the monarchy. The first recognized king of England who could truly claim that title was the Anglo-Saxon Egbert. He came to power in AD 802. So you see where I'm going with this, because I just feel like, a lot of astrologers have read this book, but maybe they don't remember that part or they weren't interested in it. And for those who've never heard it, I think it's a fascinating piece of history. So now, let's look ahead for a minute. I mean, there's a couple of things I want to finish here, and I hope that I don't run out of time. So let me see. Because usually by the end I start to get scattered. Have you guys noticed that? But I'll try to keep it together. All right, so if we look ahead to the October 25th Scorpio new moon solar eclipse, which is at 2 degrees exactly, 20, of Scorpio, we can see that it opposes, or it would have opposed, right, Queen Elizabeth's 0 degree 12 minute third house natal Taurus sun, and the opposition was from her Pluto ruled 9th house, which is in the natural chart Jupiter ruled. When I say that, what I mean is that Jupiter rules the 9th house in everyone's chart, at least according to Western tropical astrology. And in doing so, this house represents, among other things, divinity as it relates to a sense of higher consciousness. In other words, to be a king or queen is to have been divinely chosen to rule. And then your lineage is also, carried on that way, right? Now, on October 30th of 2022, so a little less than, 6 months ago, 5 months ago or so, the Taurus new moon solar eclipse fell in Elizabeth's third house, which is naturally ruled by Mercury's Gemini, which I mentioned before. And Gemini, I mentioned before, often signifies young people, while the North Node was at 2311 degrees of Taurus, and of course the South Node at the same degree in her 9th house. Now, in retrospect, we might say that Queen Elizabeth's death was destined at that time, meaning about 4 or 5 months before her actual death, to lead to a kind of passing of the torch of divinely inspired rulership to someone younger, 9th house Scorpio South Node to 3rd house North Node, despite the fact that at 73, King Charles III is not young, but he would still be considered a child to his mother, right? Now, in addition, along with the title of king, Charles has now become even wealthier as the inheritor of much of the Queen's riches, signified by the Taurus North Node, since Venus is Taurus as the ruler of the natural second house represents resources. And that includes what I mentioned before, items mined from the earth, such as diamonds, gems, gold, and other precious metals. Anyone who keeps seeing the picture of the crown that Queen Elizabeth had to wear, which now goes to Charles, knows what I'm talking about, right? So, regardless, the May 16th Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, which also passed, this past spring at 25 degrees 18 of the Taurus, the Taurus Scorpio polarity, squared the Queen's natal Neptune at 22 degrees and 2 minutes of Leo in her 7th house of partnership from her 10th and her 4th houses. So she has a natal Mars-Neptune opposition from her 1st house, with Mars at 20 degrees 51 minutes of Aquarius, which was conjoined at her passing by transiting Saturn, which had retrograded back to 20 degrees 8 minutes of Aquarius, and her Aquarius progressed moon was at 20 degrees 5 minutes, thus triggering in the 1st house, thus triggering her natal Mars-Neptune opposition. So leading up to the Pisces full moon, the day and a half before, when she relinquished not only her physical body, the sun was in Virgo, and her incarnate appearance, 1st house, progressed moon, she likewise adjusted to another dimensional state as both transiting Saturn and the progressed moon also quincunxed her natal nodes, which are at 20 degrees and 28 minutes of Capricorn and Cancer. And again, I had mentioned that her Capricorn south node was a degree or so away from her Capricorn ascendant, which is also a huge indication that she came into this lifetime with the karma of serious responsibility and job-related duties, particularly in the area of relationships. And often we think back about all her loyalty too and her fixity, right? So often the mission of a Capricorn south node is to lighten up and to become less restrictive and rigid and more self-nurturing as they move toward their Cancer North Node. Now, in addition, the whole Saturn-ruled Capricorn zodiacal archetype often indicates kind of what I just said, but not to be repetitive, that someone came in old. They say, Saturn and Capricorn are energies where you come in old and during the course of your lifetime, you lighten up enough to become flexible enough so you're no longer rigidly married only to tradition, and you're more, as I said before, self-nurturing, right? So you come in old and you go out young. And what I think was most interesting, and realize that astrologers love to look at event charts, meaning transits and progressions, right? Including at death, is that the September 10th Pisces full moon at 17 degrees and 41 minutes of the Pisces Virgo polarity fell very close to the Queen's 1st house Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius, which natally opposed her 7th house Neptune in Leo, as I said. Now, interestingly, this eclipse, which is upcoming, the one in October, will fall also on the new King Charles III's 3 degree 55 minute Scorpio south node in his 4th house of home and family, while it opposes his Taurus south node, which is conjunct his 0 degree 25 minute Taurus moon. Notice something? Charles and his mother had a very tight sun-moon conjunction at 0 degrees Taurus. A moon-sun conjunction often confers compatibility upon two people as their hearts and minds come together in a most simpatico fashion. In astrology, it's a sign of friendship. It's a sign of compatibility and a reminder that every relationship, including sexual ones, stand a better chance of survival when there's a foundational friendship underlining it, as well as things like mutual sexual attraction and ability to communicate well and having similar ethics and morals. And this eclipse also squares, though by a wider orb, the new King Charles III's 5 degree 23 minute Leo rising, which was also conjoined by his mother's 12 degree 7 minute Leo moon. I do think these two understood each other on several levels, despite the fact that, according to, programs like the Netflix's The Crown, the Queen often sided with her. South node on the ascendant. That's acquiescing to the partner. She sided with her stricter husband, Prince Philip, in terms of Charles's youth when they sent him off to boarding school where he was very unhappy, and she didn't respond in a nurturing way or a healthier way to his sensitive nature. So I am going to mention now, because again, most of this was not focused primarily on next week's news, but we have tomorrow the hang on a second because I lost my place, but tomorrow is the Venus square Mars, and you can learn more about that if you go to my Karmic Evolution Facebook page or if you sign up for my newsletter. But, this occurs, Venus in Virgo is quite demanding, right? I mentioned it last week. It can be very critical. And Mars in Gemini can be very superficial. Along with paying attention to details and Mars war on education and things like that I talked about at greater length last week, we're still seeing a lot of that stuff, right? So Venus, which is usually a bit more pliable, is now a little bit more of a stickler. She wants her I's dotted and her T's crossed, and she doesn't want to hear about superficial crap from Mars. So there's a tension here between trying to promote harmonious relationships, but also getting your own way because Mars is an ego planet. So we know that this morning there was a threatened Amtrak strike here. I'm not sure if it affected nationwide, but I know it was going to affect the major ports, probably from Virginia up to New York and further north than Boston. So Amtrak service was going to be suspended over a union dispute where they hadn't accepted the labor's offer of a contract. Well, the government stepped in and apparently they brokered an agreement from the union not to strike yet while they continue to bargain. So again, you're seeing that kind of play out, but it also corresponds with tomorrow's Virgo sun's exact opposition to Neptune in Pisces that day, which may reveal how previously avoided partnership problems could have caused us to see things not as they realistically are, but only as we desire them to be, right? But despite this disillusionment, Venus's quincunx to wounded healer Chiron in Aries on September 17th asks us to find solace in empathizing with others now, even if that's not our norm. And Mars sextile to Chiron that day, too, provides opportunities to take actions that help heal others, and in the process to help heal ourselves as well. And Mercury retrograde, which is now in Libra, reopposes Jupiter in Aries on September 8th, and that's at the same time that the Virgo sun forms an earthy trine to Pluto and Capricorn. So together they caution us to temper our enthusiasm and double-check all our details so we don't sabotage ourselves from achieving future transformational goals through sloppy planning. All right, now I am most definitely out of time, so I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, September 22nd. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.